Welcome, everyone, to the Leadership in Quarters podcast, the interview series where leaders come to share their perspectives on different leadership topics. I'm Josh Seldin, and today's guest is Kurt Uhlir. Kurt Uhlir is a senior operating executive who's been directly involved in more than 60 funding rounds and exits, working in the trenches with leadership teams as companies scale through real inflection points. He is a global keynote speaker, trusted by organizations and leaders on some of the largest stages in the world. Kurt is widely recognized as a leading expert in high-performing servant leadership. Unlike many who teach leadership from a distance, he actively leads teams every day, applying these principles inside operating companies. His work focuses on helping people and organizations win at work and at home, and his guidance has been sought by thousands of leaders, from individual contributors navigating life and leadership to senior executives and even the President of the United States. So welcome, Kurt. Glad to have you here.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Very impressive intro. It's very cool to see what you've done, and I'm glad you made the time to talk to all of us today.
Thank you for having me. I love the name of your podcast, just Leadership in Quarters. So it's a few times I get something that comes from a branding perspective. I'm like, gosh, that's awesome. I love it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I would like to start, I'd say, general and broad, and then we can get a little more detailed as we discuss. But there was one quote that you sent me that really struck me, and I'd love to start with that and dive a little deeper into it. And it was that leadership is not about charisma or title. It's about clarity, consistency, and creating momentum across functions. Can you talk a little bit more to that? Because I do feel like a lot of leaders today really navigate towards the charisma and title side and don't try to dive deeper into their leadership persona.
Yeah, great question. I think it falls very much into hiring, where we tend to hire for attributes that you don't actually see. And at the end of the day, actions are what matter. And so leadership clarity, they're observable. And so there are things such as how people prioritize without asking for permission, how meetings end with decisions, not notes. How often does a leader have to re-explain priorities? Because that's actually should be frequent. So the three things for me is like, outcomes are explicit and repeated. Leaders define the business outcomes for the year, what this quarter is about. And then every team member should be able to say, if you go and ask them, even in somebody else's team, what's the company trying to achieve? How does your role contribute to that? Second thing is healthy conflict is normal in the organization. Leaders surface disagreements. They seek them out. They invite opposing views. You're going to see that in their actions. They will treat silence as risk as opposed to alignment like most people do. And the third thing that I think for me is leaders treat people as the whole person. They're going to seek out in short, consistent one-on-ones to be aware of what's going on in the person's real life. Some people may not want to share. They may just want to, they have something going on. Other people may expose, they got thrust into elder care, special needs children, a healthcare crisis with a spouse, all of which are going to impact their work and vice versa if you're not aware of it.
So how does a leader build that trust and psychological safety with their organization to help enable a lot of those things? And an example that you just mentioned was sharing things about elders or family members, or you always have those quiet people on your team. And the amount of times I've been in a meeting where somebody says, any input, I'll take silence as concurrence, and then you just move on. How do you build enough trust in that organization so somebody feels confident enough to bring it up?
You have to bring up things that are going on with you to others, and often in a way that you don't necessarily feel comfortable with. That could be current things. It could be things in the past, and especially the things to bring up around healthy conflict. The only things you can bring up publicly, to my experience, is issues where you have failed. Somebody else has called you out on it, and you bring that out to the whole team. Or what happens very frequently as us as leaders is there are things that we think that we are correct about, and we make the decisions thinking that we're correct. And then when data changes over time, we realize, no, not just did things shift, that was actually a bad decision. And so when you bring up either decisions that were bad or cases where you haven't had healthy conflict and somebody called you out, and you bring that out in front of the largest group possible, people start to realize, oh, this place is actually different than all of the companies that just have words and mission statements and culture statements on their website. If the leader's not doing that about themselves, that's a huge problem. I even in some cases will do that, like healthy conflict. I had that issue. I verified it with somebody on the other person's team. I then went to two more people to verify it as well. And then I exposed it to the whole team.
I think it's so important because you read all about these companies that just write everything on the wall. Their culture is what's written on the wall, but they don't actually practice anything that they have written on that wall. And your leadership team, your culture, all of that is like a relationship. And they always say to your personal relationship outside of work, wife, husband, partner, whoever, if you have no conflict, it's not a sign of a healthy relationship. Healthy relationships have
Right.
conflict, and it's so tough to get people to be comfortable with that.
Yeah, and we've almost all either worked for a toxic boss or a toxic company that we have PTSD. And
Right.
so no matter how many times the leader might actually be that person, you come into the organization, you hear it from them. They may generally be that person until you start to see it in their actions, you're not going to believe it. I was part of selling a company to a public company. And on paper, to your point, on the website, the company we sold was everything I would want to work for. Healthy conflict, bias towards action, strong opinions held loosely and worded differently, but that's what the public company had on there. And then you get inside the company, and it was none of those things. And people were like, I only care that I don't get any of the failure and that I get all of the credit and bias towards action until you get your hand slapped. And so those things happen. And so people have to see this continually in your actions.
Right. And that encourages the silo behaviors I feel like we see a lot in organizations, because the other thing you mentioned is clarity and making sure that anybody can talk about the company's vision and the company's goals and all of these things. And those are broad. That means every organization, every multifunctional organization will work together to achieve those. Yet when we do everything you just said from these toxic companies, all you're doing is encouraging everybody to back off, work in their silos, and not work together towards those visions.
Yeah, I like when you mentioned there, like people in silos. I think so often as leaders, especially really good leaders, we do things just by nature and we don't think about how everybody else is reacting to the bad leadership style that's out there. And so we do things that's unconsciously screwing up our organizations. And so if we're not intentionally stepping into things that are not necessarily in our nature, but to make up for the rest of the world, like things won't come out and we're going to lose consistency over time. And we can go into those details, but that's, I think, the big thing for a lot of leaders is you do have to do things that is not in your nature to make up for all the toxic behaviors of other organizations. And not even toxic. Some cases it's just not healthy or not great.
Right. And you have to be so intentional about all of that. Like you said, it's things that are unintentional or unconscious that we do that do screw up our organizations, which means we have to flip that switch, be intentional. And maybe it isn't even a toxic company that they've been in, but something that happened in their life that when we don't stop and seek to understand why they're acting the way they are and understand that working with you is going to be different than working with this other person. And so, yes, I have to stay true to my core leadership style, but I have to maybe have that be different a little bit as we interact with different people to bring out the best. We don't stop and think, hey, why is this person acting the way they are? A lot of times the leaders just steamroll and go forward and again go towards whatever they're getting rewarded for.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so often there's things that we don't realize as leaders. We're all people and we all come from
Mhm.
different places. And not only that, some of the things are just outdated the way companies are run. In other cases, the companies and the leadership, especially boards are so often nowadays made up at the private company size, venture capital, private equity, and public company. They're made up of people that are not operators or they don't have the diverse viewpoints that are actually running in the organization there. So you end up with people making poor decisions. Anybody that owns an Amazon Echo has realized like one thing for sure. That is that nobody in Amazon, as large as they are, has ownership over the entire experience of the Amazon Echo, or even something as little as like Amazon Music, where it's like we've bought thousands of dollars of individual songs and albums over the time, but we don't have the full music subscription. And so trying to get it to play does not work well because in their mind at Amazon, everybody has the subscription anymore, never thinking the Eulers have spent $2,000 on music and
Right.
can't get it to play the song that they want it to play.
That's right. It's the user experience that they're not focusing on. They're focusing on what they think they need and not listening to what their consumers and their users are saying.
Yeah, and it goes back to that term you used before, siloed. And so we're doing things where we separate out, and it's like some of those mistakes that I see are it's companies silo accountability. And so the function is optimized for their own scorecards, and the success or failure gets attributed to individual teams or people as opposed to shared. Like even as a marketer, there's no growth metric that my team owns. We contribute to a whole bunch, but even sales, like sales doesn't own that number because I've given leads over where I went to high school with the person that you easily closed. Who gets credit for that? Both of us to some degree. And so these companies silo accountability. Leaders assume alignment. They announce priorities, they walk away, and they don't check for understanding. And they confuse that silence we talked about with agreement or comprehension. My wife mentioned years ago, she used to have a large marketing agency that shared an office with a technology company I had. And she came back and she goes, I think I realized how frequently you need to say things for your teams to understand them. And I said, why? She said, because you say things so often that they annoy me at home because I hear them. And I was like, is that a good thing or bad thing? She goes, I think it's a great thing because your team's just starting to get it now. And I was like, oh, okay, so I've now given that to people I've coached, and they're like, I've got it. And people don't have a shared language for outcomes. So again, how do my actions reach an outcome that affect the outcomes we want for a company? And they really care about things like fairness over truth. Like back to that Amazon
Yeah,
issue or customer support. I don't want a company that's closing tickets and that's what their metrics are. I want a company whose support team is focused on closing problems with a customer. Leave a Zendesk ticket open for 2 years if need be.
exactly. Fix the problem so all the customers don't have it, as opposed to fixing 2,000 tickets of the same issue.
Yeah, or even just so that you can acknowledge it, so that it pops back to the CRM, so that when you call back to the person with something, you be like, you're not going to fix that edge case bug that's bothering them and not 10,000 other people, but you're aware of it. So either sales or customer support can be acknowledged of it and go, yeah, I know that's still going on for you. We're sorry about that. We're still not going to fix it, but we solved this other thing that you reached out about.
One other thing that you mentioned that I'd love to dive in a little deeper to is assuming alignment. And so back to clarity, a leader hopefully has a vision, has a thought of where they want to go, what goals they want to achieve. They go and they talk to their group about it and they say, hey, this is our roadmap. This is what we want to go do. Any thoughts? Silence, right? We assume alignment and then we leave the room. I know you mentioned, what your wife said, where you just keep saying the same thing over and over to really get it through to people what our goals are. But is there anything else that you've done or you've seen that work to make sure that you have actual alignment and not just this assumed alignment when you go and you set your vision for your team?
Yeah, great question. So some of that is shifting the whole culture to thinking about contribution versus attribution. When you do that, you have marketing butting elbows with product and with customer success or with sales. Let's say an example, maybe when a customer doesn't renew with your company, is that the fault of your product? Did sales sell false expectations? Or did marketing actually set a bad expectation with a press release that person read? Or maybe
Mm,
they saw an article in TechCrunch or something, which shifted a whole down chain of events. It could have been all three of those things. And so that's a contribution approach, which says, hey, this person did not renew. We may or may not be able to identify it exactly, but let's go look at that. And so that's part of from that alignment perspective, because when everybody is looking at, especially the things that could have gone better, and they're
mhm.
looking at their own piece and saying, I don't know if it's this, and I might even think it's you, but here's how I could have contributed to that. That's their response, their actions in that case. It's going to show you if there's actually alignment towards what the company's trying to do. That other bit that I mentioned is I think it is critical that two things are happening for alignment. One is that you have people that are not the direct manager or leader of that person asking the individuals how their daily activities, their weekly activities contribute to the company's goals.
Mm.
And that's coming back never a way that's meant to slap anybody's hand, but a coaching aspect. Because if consistently people, either person or the company's numbers, they can't do that, there's not alignment. And then the other thing I just really look at is, since I do thrive in healthy conflict, if I'm pointing out as the leader, here's the outcomes we're wanting to achieve, and here's how your outcomes help us reach those, I'm not going to have everything. There's no way that could be possible. And so if people are not coming to me either in public or on one-on-ones and saying, I have ideas for things you're not seeing, things you haven't considered. I'd like to try this to reach those outcomes in a different way. Then there's no way that there's alignment, because unless you only have two or three people on the team, and even then, I still would expect people to be coming to you and going,
Right.
you say you want to do this with a company's perspective, but I think that there's a better way.
And you got to get the leaders out of that whole ego thought process and get them off that pedestal, because a lot of times leaders think, I'm in this position, I'm this hot shot, or even I've seen new leaders that come right out of college. And so I work in manufacturing. The amount of people I've seen come out of college and go, I have a college degree and don't want to listen to the person who's been operating the manufacturing line for 30 years.
Right.
Like, it's ridiculous. And you mentioned, I think in your intro too, that you come at this from an operator perspective because you've operated all of this and a lot of the leaders don't. And to not then listen to the operators, listen to the people who live these things and know where our inefficiencies are is, I think, a huge issue that we see today because you're right. We, as the core leader, as the one leader, will never have everything right. Our plan is never 100% foolproof. And if we don't have a team willing to help us and willing to tell us that, then we're never going to get where we want to go.
Yeah, there's not a situation that's longer than about 5 minutes where there's an individual that knows everything that's going on
Right.
and the perfect way to operate that. And so, to your point, like manufacturing, it's like the things that I just continue to come back to where it's like not only there's day-to-day activities where you likely could be improving, things always come up in a business, at least on a monthly basis, if not weekly, where there's a wrench that gets thrown
Oh,
figuratively
yeah.
into the machinery and somebody else's experience may have approached it completely different. And so the examples that I give, and this is like real world and in manufacturing, was my brother when he was 18 worked in a manufacturing plant grinding up materials for paint and got pulled into the machine that grinds things up.
Oh, my
So
God.
the men and the women on the factory line, they were able to and smart enough to pull him out before it pulled him in. That was a big OSHA violation there.
Yeah.
Everybody at that point literally lost their lunch or ran because they couldn't deal with what they saw for what was left of my brother's arm, except for one person who stepped up. My brother's 18 years old. My brother walked the janitor through tying a tourniquet on his arm. So the people, to your point, that have been 40 years on the factory line had no idea what to happen when this major catastrophe happened, including stopping the machine to stop breaking the machine. And afterwards, the janitor was asked, like, how did you help save this kid's life? And he goes, I cleaned toilets in a factory. Nothing could ever turn my stomach, but I don't know what to do. And that kid knew what to do a tourniquet, and he literally told me what to do. Things like that happen like at factories, but they also happen in the boardroom or doing financials, and somebody else has an experience that you don't have. Just be open to it. And
Yeah.
hopefully it's not the same trauma.
Hopefully not. Hopefully it doesn't get to that level. But your example is great because you can't discount anybody sitting at the table.
Right.
And whether it's in a boardroom or it's anybody, I've worked at plants that the plant manager will also go clean the bathrooms because they're not above a janitor or somebody cleaning the bathroom. And that's how we have to treat people because, again, they all bring some other type of skill that we won't have, or maybe we do have it, but it's a weaker skill. And we need to lean on other people because either if we don't, we'll burn ourselves out, we'll do a crappy job at what we're trying to do, and then we'll never get where we want to go. So I think your example completely shows that.
Yep.
One thing I'd like to get to back to the silos, and we've talked a lot so far about having the different organizations being in this together. It's not always just one organization's problem. How do you or how have you seen when you have multifunctional teams or organizations working together and they are trying to work towards the vision and the goal, but the priorities shift or you have competing priorities? Because if you've got sales and marketing and R&D or whoever, yes, all of their work will go towards the vision, but maybe it's not R&D's time. Doesn't mean
Right.
they stop their work, but maybe this quarter we have to focus the priorities on marketing, but that doesn't mean R&D's work is less important, but they're going to feel that way. How do you see those competing priorities?
Great question. I feel like there's usually only competing priorities because leadership has not walked the team through structurally, and the leadership doesn't have systems in place to do this themselves in your mind into forcing the actions and the investments into near term, like 2 to 12 month decisions,
Hmm.
midterm, 12 to 36 month decisions, and long term, 36+ month decisions. So, in the case of marketing, to your example, if you're thinking in terms of just marketing, first of all, that three things tells you where to invest between product and those other things. But even just within marketing, I go, I want to force when I say a 36 month plus thing, imagine that you invest $1 into marketing. That you may be able to get a leading indicator you can track, but there is no lagging indicator. There's no effect on sales for 36 months in one day. That's how much of a prioritization. When you split things up like that, and there's that clearly the today for the next 2 months, but that's just usually operation keeping things going. But when you're looking at it and have the whole organization talking about, we decided we're going to invest 60% of our resources this year over 2 to 12 months, 15% over another period. And then you look at the rest of it and you start to have that decision. There's usually not competing priorities. Those conversations become much easier than when you say, look, we now decided like, here's the 60% we're going to put towards 2 to 12 month. And then within that, how much then goes to your point, not towards product, but towards marketing. It makes sense then, both in the pure temporal perspective, but things become very clear. And then everybody actually gets on board. product, especially in engineering or manufacturing, they're almost always talking about debt, retooling factory lines, and all this maintenance that everybody just wants to put off. In software engineering, usually there's a backlog of stuff that's just, we just have updates and things that are not going to affect revenue, and they just keep putting it off till things break. At some point, companies have to do that, and it's a huge amount of time at that point. Marketing is the same thing that says, look, if you're not the largest two or three brands, you have to build trust, or you've lost 7 out of 10 deals initially. Okay, then that means that we have to invest some amount of money in things that aren't going to drive sales today. That's a very different thing than trying to drive pipeline leads right now.
That's so tough for people in leadership to see because, and I say this as somebody who's owned maintenance and eliminating breakdowns and things in a manufacturing organization, and how the investment today, you may not see the output of it for another month, 2 months. It's like your car. The
All right.
change oil light comes on, you don't just ignore it because at some point your car is going to break. But getting them to think ahead and not to the outcomes of today. They want that immediate gratification. And with those kind of things, it's not going to happen, but it doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to focus on for the future.
Yeah, I find it is that they want the instant gratification, but from a psychological perspective, when you look at the neurons and where do we get the dopamine,
Mm.
they want to check the completed box. And so when they do something in the short term, they feel like it's done only because they don't have the systems in place that says, hey, look, on this longer term thing, on this 12-month project, this 36-month project, to be able to actually, one, have a system that separates out. And there's ways we could talk about that where you actually force everybody in the room to think in terms of we're only talking about this time frame. But then when the decision's done, acknowledging the decision in a way that does trigger the same dopamine, that like it's complete when we agree to what the 36-month plan is and we decide that we're actually going to do that and we hand it to somebody to own doing that. We should all sit back, and at that point we should just be like, that's incredible. I look back to like years ago, we owned this big mountain property in North Georgia. And my wife, I think once when growing up, had done a push mower because like they had to in their family for something. And she asked if she could do the riding lawnmower. And I do knowledge work all day
Yeah.
long. And I go out and do property. And she went in mode because you drive a car, you can drive
Yeah.
a riding lawnmower. And she was ecstatic. And I'm like, what? And she was like, that was incredible. I said, well, why? I mentioned she ran a marketing agency. She goes, because I started it and I finished it in 30 minutes. Like it's done. And I was like, yeah. And so she actually took that back to her agency to shift when they finished a strategy plan. They changed how they relished. We did what we're now going to implement for the next 12 months for the client. We should sit down and let's just have coffee and enjoy that as if we've completed all the activities because that is a completion.
Yeah, Kurt, you hit the nail on the head for me just in terms of my experience because I've been in a lot of project roles within manufacturing. And again, it's things that you build 2 to 4 years out of things that you hope come to fruition. You come and you do this, but you don't have that day to day dopamine hit. And having these milestones, I feel like is so important where a lot of times in the past, you didn't celebrate, you didn't say, hey, we finished, job well done until the project was there. And then God forbid the project ever didn't go well, then you're focused on the negative on, oh, how do we fix this? How do we get the lines back up and running? But you didn't say, oh man, we're through design review. We actually have an idea of what we want this to look like. And hey, the parts arrived and hey, we've tested it and everything works the way it was designed. And people don't build in these milestones of celebration. They don't build in these intentional dopamine hits. And I feel like that is a big detractor from that journey when you're looking at that 36-month instead of the day to day.
Yeah, most everyone is focused on lagging indicators. Sales are
Yes.
completed. The new factory line's been done. They do not think ahead of time in terms of leading indicators. And as a marketer, I'm keenly aware of this because of all parts of the organization. Marketing has the most statistics, so I can always find a number that makes my campaign look like it was successful. And everybody knows that. So most people think marketers lie. And I'm like, no, up front, especially as we look at the longer time frames, I want to track the leading indicators more than the lagging. You have to do that to your point on
Mm.
the longer term things. So the dopamine actually comes from two things. One, saying we've agreed up front so that when I come to you and say we're being successful, we're on track, you don't feel like I'm just trying to justify my job. But on the other side, we get the dopamine of saying, hey, we've created our checklist. And then every time we come back, we go, okay, we now know that we're on the right path, or we have the wise data to say we need to adjust. And without thinking about leading indicators, especially as the time frame gets longer, you don't realize if you're making a wise decision every step along that path until, to your point, it fails. No, there were a bunch of paths in line of making a new manufacturing line where you could have known if you were off or not. You just didn't. So there's both celebrating and, gosh, if we need a correct path, can we do that?
And that is the critical thing I think, is that every scoreboard, every scorecard I've seen has lagging indicators and not leading indicators. And by then it's too late. And people don't realize that. When you go and you
Right.
see how your previous month was and you're reporting all the data 7 days into the new month, if your previous month's results were bad, they were bad. Can't do anything about them. As opposed to looking at the leading indicators, like you said, if we're on track, great. If we're not on track, we can pivot and we can make a change and improve or impact before we get to a bad lagging indicator. But people don't seem to work that way.
They don't seem to do that. And some of that it goes back to the people they put on their board do not have the experience and the proven track record across multiple industries and those functions to be able to step in and say, we need to know this. If we're investing $50 million into your plan, we want to know before, as we're working online, can we correct and not get 2 years out and go, we just blew $50 million. I
Right.
want to know, like, I'm okay making it $60 million if we get a success as opposed to a $50 million failure. And they don't bring people in that force that decision up front that says, well, how will we know if this is the correct thing as we're moving forward? And that's not a lagging indicator.
So, if you're looking at these leading indicators and you're seeing that all the progress that we have is stalling or it's not doing what we need it to do, what have you seen be successful from leaders to enable the change and enable the pivot as opposed to just pushing the group harder? Because I feel like that's what a lot of leaders do. They're like, oh, we'll push through it, we'll push harder, we'll work weekends, we'll do all these things, but they don't look for systemic solutions. They just try to brute force their fix.
Yeah, they don't realize that their company's performance is never going to outgrow the level of their team from a capabilities perspective. To your point, they just look for effort and they don't try to improve the capacity of the people, the knowledge of the people, because it feels slow to coach. And so what they don't do is they don't slow down to that point we talked about before and say, hey, do you know how your actions are going to reach the outcomes that their company is wanting? And they just tell people do better. I have a friend who owned a large P&L in the construction industry that could sell anything to anybody. I'd say he could probably step into like hospitals and start selling knee replacement. He was really good. And he had this woman that wasn't performing on his team. And he just kept basically saying, if you don't hit your numbers, it's going to be a performance plan. If you don't hit your numbers, now we're going to have to let you go. And they ended up letting her go. And not once did he ever say, hey, can I pull up alongside of you and actually listen to your next two sales calls? Can you listen to several phone calls of me? And then after getting what's going on, say, so here's the new coaching approach. I'm going to do and you're going to watch. You're going to do and I'm going to help. And then you do it. And then I'll just give you feedback after. They don't do that. And so that's a huge bit of it. We don't coach our way into it. We push hard. We don't acknowledge that I'm looking for effectiveness and outcomes from you over the month, the quarter, and the year, not the day and the week. And so, to your point, they push for things that lead to burnout because they're looking for short term,
Yep.
and they don't either come back and say, "Hey, how do we improve the whole capacity?" Or especially sometimes you'll see an individual or two on a team, they just lose their productivity, and the leader just comes in really hard because they know they're capable of more, and they
Right.
never slow down to ask what changed in your life, either at work or at home, that has affected how you're showing up at work. And without using that term, it's not going to trigger something negative out of a person. It's not, you're now showing up differently, Josh. What's
Right.
changed? And then just being quiet.
Yeah, people need to learn to listen. A lot of times leaders like to hear their voice. And I love the phrase. I worked with somebody who used to say this, that you're given two ears and one mouth, use them proportionally. And we don't do that nearly enough. But I think it comes back to what we started this with, listening to the people, trying to understand and seek to understand why what you're seeing is what you're seeing. Is it something that happened in their life? Or even I've seen it on my team where you've only got so many hours in the week and you only have so much capacity. And when people can't do what you're asking them to do with the current capacity they have, we always assume it's a people issue. We always assume they're not doing it because of some reason. But back to the focusing on the operators and the people who are in the trenches doing this work, ask them what their holdup is. So I have two people who work for me, and we have this process of making sure all of our specs are where they need to be before we can go put a product out. And they're like, between the two of us, we spend 30 hours a week on paperwork. It's how do we fix the system? It's not that they're not trying. It's not that they're not doing the work they need to do. It's that they're bogged down by the system. But as a leader, if I don't ask the questions, I just assume it's a them issue, not a system issue.
Yeah. So everything that you said, and I look at it as, especially me, I'm going to step into companies where we're either creating a category or we're trying to redefine or change a category. I'm in a company right now where we're literally trying to dethrone Zillow and Redfin, things that people have tried and literally spent $500 million on and failed at it. Like, and we're making really good progress. Like we
Nice.
step up every day with a small team, and I want my people to realize I need you to go to war with me, not just win a battle. And so I'm not paying them for 40 hours or 50 hours a week. I'm wanting things where we're going to have innovative ideas. We're going to have to change and flex. And so not everything is how do we 10x or 50x a company, but still you have to realize if you're expecting things that are unreasonable from people, they should be coming to you with unreasonable ideas or taking unreasonable actions at time. And if that's not happening, like something's going on.
Exactly. And I think thinking out of the box and taking those unreasonable actions is necessary for growth. And it makes some people uncomfortable, but it's what's needed. But I appreciate everything so that we've been able to talk through. Before we close out, is there anything else, any final words that you want to share with everybody?
I'd say I'm always open to feedback as well. So the only reason I am the leading expert on high performing servant leadership is because a lot of people have given me harsh critiques on things that I write. And so people go to my website. If there's anything you agree with, don't agree with, you think could be explained differently, tell me. I want to hear the harsh stuff.
Perfect. And again, it's that healthy conflict, it's that feedback that we need because that's how we improve. And for somebody like you who has such a far reach, it's important to have all the right stuff there. So, everybody, it's Kurt Uhlir. I'll make sure all of his information and his website are available on all the posts in the YouTube description here so everybody can see it. You can obviously access this podcast on all the different platforms that we have for the podcast. You can look at my Instagram at Leading Quarters, at my YouTube page at Leading Quarters, and email me with any questions that you might have or ideas for future episodes at leadingquarters@gmail.com. Of course, if you want to get a hold of Kurt, I'll have all of his information there. But if for whatever reason you can't get a hold of him, just email me. We'll get you both in touch with each other. But Kurt, I appreciate everything that you've brought today. It is definitely, I'd say, partially a different way of thinking that I've seen, but also a reinforcement of other productive ways of thinking that I've seen. And it's definitely humbling and energizing seeing what you've accomplished in your leadership style. So I appreciate everything that you've shared today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Josh.